The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
CJ, can we do a Leafs corner to start today's episode? Because I watched the LFR from Steve Dangle on Wednesday morning. He doesn't seem like things are going too well, especially after last night's game where not only do the Leafs lose, Auston Matthews and Anthony Stolarz don't finish the game. Can we start with an injury update on those two? What have you been hearing on those guys?
Well, in Matthews' case, it doesn't sound like it's anything too serious. Don't have any concrete timelines, but kind of the expectation that I've been given is, wouldn't expect to see him Thursday when the Leafs host LA. They go to Chicago on Saturday. Don't know if he'll be able to get in there, but I don't think this is, for Auston Matthews, at least at the outset, looking like a long-term, injury situation, which is obviously a good thing. As much as, yes, the team has struggled of late and he maybe hasn't scored at some of his previous levels. I mean, this guy's still basically on a 50-goal pace and, is clearly a key member of what the Leafs need to get going to turn things around. Stolarz, Craig Berube after the game in Boston didn't seem to think it was going to be anything too serious as well. But, the larger issue with him is he's played a lot of games. Having his goaltending partner, Joseph Woll, be away from the team, for personal reasons, has not necessarily set him up to have the best start to the season. And certainly he's had a big decline in his performance so far. So, I don't get the sense that either of these are going to be super serious. But, at the same time, it's the cavalry isn't back right away. And you still got Chris Tanev on the sidelines, Scott Laughton. And on top of that, you just have a Leafs team that hasn't put it all together yet in a way that they would like to. So they're kind of in one. They're not alone in the league. There's a few other teams, Vancouver kind of in the same spot with some injured players and needing something good to start happening. And it's harder and harder to do that when you don't have the full complement of players. But in Toronto, 15 goals against in 3 games kind of tells a story to me. I mean, obviously there's a story within that story, but the Leafs have scored more than enough goals to have more wins than they do, but they've had trouble keeping it out of their net for a variety of reasons. And frankly, trouble getting it out of the zone, I think the defensive zone has been probably at the root of their issues. And so they've been outplayed to quite handily at 5-on-5 in these games.
What I'm hearing is there are a whole bunch of issues that maybe at some point the general manager, Brad Treliving, has to deal with, either through some kind of acquisition or something has to change with their lineup. Because right now, yes, their record is at 500, but to see them take this step back from what we've seen of the Leafs for the last how many seasons, something feels really off. I wonder what could be done for Brad Treliving and how hot should his seat be as general manager?
This is where he's earning his money. That's the way I look at it. I mean, I think most listeners of our pod will know you come here not for the hot takes. And so the way I look at the Leafs situation is thusly. This is when everyone is going to have lots of big ideas. This is going to be you have to start the rebuild in Toronto on one end to you've got to fire the head coach to, any number of things. I think if you cut through the noise and look at really what's happening though, the Leafs, the blue line is not moving the puck very well. And, I think that is a big issue is, you saw the Carolina game was at an extreme end on Sunday night, but once the Hurricanes got their forecheck going, like the Leafs were just stuck in their own zone. And the interesting part of Toronto's season to me, you look at William Nylander, he's actually having a hell of a year. John Tavares at his age, especially, but forget that piece of context, just straight up look at his point totals and some of the numbers under it. He's having a good year. Even as I mentioned, Auston Matthews, who I don't think has been at the previous levels we've seen him when he's been at his best. But he's not having a poor year. He's having maybe a small downtick from where he's been, but again, still a 50-goal player. Like if he had 3 more goals to this point in the season, they might not even have any more wins. Like they might have just still won the same number of games. It's not excusing the top players because, as I say, I do think especially with Matthews, there's a higher ceiling to get to there, but it kind of raises overall questions about, the talent level on the roster, some of the things that sort of the trade-ins they've made, right? And, prioritizing certain areas of the game. It's very, I think the hard part for if you're Brad Treliving is knowing where the truth lies here, because they really haven't been either at their best together. They've been injured. I mean, it's just been one of those years. Like, I think trying to not overreact in this moment is particularly tough because, at a certain point, maybe you have to change course and say, this isn't it. Clearly the Leafs could use on a bigger level an injection of talent. I think another defenseman for me seems like we're not there yet, but as we get into the season a little deeper, I think that's where this is where the conversation I predict is going. A lot of people in Toronto have been talking about them needing another top six forward, which would be nice. It would be a luxury. It would be great if that person was out there, but I'm not sure if it will be. But I would not be at all surprised to see them put a lot of their efforts as the season goes along into adding to the blue line, because that to me has been where a lot of the problems have started and ended. And yes, they could be propped up by better goaltending. Yes, we can find a clip or two of a forward not, defending in a way you would want. But I think largely the issues stem from the makeup of the blue line, and they have been injured there. It's a long way of saying I don't know that they can trade their way out of this. I do think that this is going to be the biggest test Brad Treliving's faced since he's come to Toronto, because a lot of people have a lot of opinions, and it's getting late. Like, I'm not here to sit here and say, hey, you have to be patient. But I think not making a bad decision under this current duress is imperative. And I don't know where he goes next. So I'm sure, like most GMs, you almost want to give your team enough time to correct the problems, because I think when you have a team with the kind of skill the Leafs have, I really do believe there's a better team in there than what we've seen to start this season. But you also can't ignore the results, and they haven't played very well. The product isn't good to watch. And, the coach, well, I'm certainly not saying this is only a coaching issue. The coach is pushing a lot of buttons, and he's obviously had some pretty frank assessments of their play, and he hasn't got a response either. So, this is a big spot for Toronto, and they're still well within a spot to make the playoffs. They haven't dug that big a hole, but they can't let this slide go on much longer.
Knowing you enough and how you feel about rebuilds, how do you feel when you hear certain fans say, man, maybe this is the year we find a way to tank for Gavin McKenna? I mean, that top five, that pick is top 5 protected. Just in my head, when I hear that, I'm like, really, guys? Like, come on. Like, this team can't be so bad where you're hoping that they bottom out in that way. But this is just coming from me as someone who's not in that fan base or is not in that market. So I'm curious for your thoughts when you hear people say that maybe you got to find a way to go for a top 5 pick in this year's draft.
To me, that's dreaming in Technicolor. I just think the Leafs have too much skill for that to happen. I mean, I suppose there could be some calamity of injuries that creates a circumstances where they completely nosedive. I mean, even where we're sitting here and we're both saying, yeah, we haven't seen this team play anywhere near what's good enough or what they should want. I mean, they're still a long way from bottom 5 in the league. I think they're on pace for about 89 points or something at the current rate, or 88
They're fighting
points.
For a playoff spot.
But the point is I realize that's below where they want to be, and I'm not saying that's acceptable, but that's a long, long way from the 57 points it might take to get, to have the best odds at winning the draft lottery. Now, if they miss the playoffs and they're within the certain range, they could still, I guess, move up and, pick high. We saw Utah last year didn't miss the playoffs by too much and jumped all the way up and made a top 5 pick. So, I mean, anything is possible, but I don't think the Leafs are in that conversation just yet. And certainly I have no reason to believe. I don't even know if it's so obvious I shouldn't say this, but just so anyone could be clear, it is not in the eyes of Leafs management or ownership where they're rebuilding. Now, I'm not saying they won't get there at some point in time. Like, you can't rule it out. But, not even 20 games into the season, they took the Florida Panthers to 7 games in the second round last year. And, I do think it's the key is I'll say this. The key to avoid the big, huge rebuild where you get rid of everything is, I think, being proactive and deciding when the moment is to start the refresh. Like, sometimes you got to do it before everyone else sees that it's obvious that you're doing it. But it's just too early. It's still too early for me with the Leafs. Now, that being said, look, they need to be in trade markets. They need to be looking for ways to try to lift the ceiling of this group. I think, the Leafs don't have as much skill as they once did. I understand the push towards grit and other things that they feel might help them come playoff time. But at a certain point in time, you need a team that can play with the puck. And, they don't have that right now. I mean, the shot metrics for this team are ugly, especially for a team that's supposed to be, winning a lot in the league. And as I say, the thing that I find most troubling is their top players have actually played. If you remove all the outrage and people just being upset in general, that in Toronto, like, those guys individually have actually played pretty well. And so I don't know that we can hang it on them. I mean, it's quite possible this is just the wrong mix of players. But so I think all the criticism or anyone who's freaking out about this, like, I think we're deep enough in the season. It's a fair reaction. But that doesn't mean the people running the team or the person, if we're talking about the GM, Brad Treliving or Craig Berube, who obviously has a say in things just beyond even the typical coaching staff. I think his voice in the front office is valued. They need to think through this clearly, and it's probably a hard time to get clear thoughts because of, just how bad some of the play has been as a team.
CJ, I'm not sure with this group, from what I've seen, that I'm confident that they could play at a much higher, different level so they could be better. Well, how do you see it?
The one area I think they can still be better, even with the exact same makeup of team, even with a player or two missing from the lineup that's helpful, is I think they can find a way to give up a little less to the other team. I think there's a way for them. And look, it might be some of what Craig Berube said. It might honestly not be much fun. Might be literally sacrificing offense in order to overcorrect on defense. But between that and the possibility of some better goaltending, I do see a world where they could cut down a little bit of what's happened in their own end. And so, I realize this isn't going to make anyone who's a hardcore Leafs fan who's down with the team feel much better, because, I'm not saying they can go more run and gun and maybe start winning some 6-5 games. I mean, that might happen on a night here or there, but I don't think as a trend we can say that that's what's going to go on. That's why I do think that over time here, we're going to start really focusing on an addition to this team's defense core. I really believe that's where the efforts and energy are going to get to, for the front office at a point here in the future. But in the meantime, they just got to find a way to grind out some wins. And usually, even when your team has skill, even when you have offensive players that, keep beating that drum, are putting up the kind of point totals you want them to. They've done a lot of it at 5-on-5. Like, it's not a lot of cheap points in there. Like, the starts these guys have had is actually, it's one of the positive lights in the season, but no one's celebrating it because, the overall results for the team haven't been there. But there might be a way to do that. I think most people, honestly, Julian, I think people understood this was going to be a bit of a step back year. You don't lose a player like Mitch Marner and immediately get better. Like, I don't think anyone thought the Leafs were going to have a better regular season without Mitch Marner. What the organization and the front office is trying to do is use that opportunity to reframe a little bit what the team looks like, to try to make personnel decisions that they could make for a longer playoff run. And the truth is it might take till next summer when they're going to have a lot more cap flexibility to make an addition before, it's like a one step back, I guess, to try to take two ahead. But, the one step back is not being received well. There's a lot of people that are upset about it, and you're starting to see the hot takes and you're starting to see the heat go up. And again, as I say, I think those questions are accurate, but truth be told, I do think this was always setting up as going to be a harder year. Just the path to the playoffs is going to be more tough. It could make them better for it. We'll have to see over time. But some of that is an article of faith, because I'm not seeing things on the ice that I'm like, ooh, they've been really unlucky with the results. Like, it's not It's not been that. I mean, they've really been outplayed in a lot of games. The shot metrics are the shot metrics. You can't be accepting that much of the game in your own end unless you're either getting elite defending or amazing goaltending or some combination of the two. That has not been there in Toronto. So, they're definitely already up against, the wall to a degree because we've seen other teams get better around them. So, I'm not going to go to the full deep end of this where at the first sign of them really being in trouble, I'm saying you got to blow up this core and start fresh. But I do think that the front office is going to have to get bold at a certain point in time. I don't think that time is November 12th or 13th. I don't see those trades out there. I don't hear the names that would need to be thrown around to see that there could be a real difference-making deal. And ultimately, the Leafs aren't another fourth liner away, even if it's a really good fourth liner, from changing the tide here. I think it's got to be someone who raises the overall group ceiling. It's got to be a real difference maker. And as I said, won't surprise me if that ends up being a defenseman rather than a forward.
A puck-moving defenseman. I think at this point, we got to keep a real good eye out for teams who start to fall in the standings these next couple of weeks and see what puck movers could be available and end up being trade targets for them.
Yeah, it could be Toronto. It could be, Utah is a team looking for a top four if it's the right person. I think Edmonton could be in that market. I think Vegas will be in that market. Keep in mind, Vegas, they've managed to hold water here, even down Mark Stone, down Aiden Hill, but they're also down Alex Pietrangelo from the offseason. So, that could be a team I think will be shopping for defensemen. So, by no means is this a Toronto only issue. And if the player is enticing enough, it's a big enough name or a big enough difference maker, it won't only be the Leafs in on that player. But I think the Leafs as an organization are still going to operate in a very aggressive manner to try to put this core of players in a chance to win again. And they've had many chances. I mean, they've been in the playoffs those 9 straight years. No one else in the league can say that, but looks like it's going to be a bit of a slog to make that 10 in a row and to keep giving themselves a chance in the spring.
This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Harry's. CJ, your beard is looking real good today.
Well, I used to rely on my barber, but there's no need now because I am getting a barbershop shave every morning in my bathroom with Harry's. Love the shaving cream as well. I think you got to go for both products if you're going to be going down the Harry's road. But the razor feels great in your hand, and it just gives you that nice, crisp, nice feel. And no cuts, man. Look at my face. No cuts.
I got to say, man, you're looking real good. And if you want to look as good as CJ does, for a limited time, our listeners can get the Harry's Plus trial set for only $10 at harrys.com/CJ. It includes the Harry's Plus razor, one refined 5-blade cartridge, 2-ounce foaming shave gel, and a travel cover to protect your blades on the go. harrys.com/CJ to claim the offer and tell them we sent you. Let's move away from the Leafs and talk about Olympic teams. Team Canada meeting this week. Of course, they're still putting their team together ahead of February. Any other insight you're hearing on who could be in for a roster spot, who could be out for a roster spot? We're seeing a lot more of these roster projections come up, CJ.
Yeah, unfortunately, we didn't see Doug Armstrong's roster projection or Don Sweeney, Kyle Dubas, Julian Brisebois, Jim Nill, the other members of the management staff, Scott Salmon from Hockey Canada. But, it's notable they met for 9 hours earlier this week in Toronto. It's notable that they've kind of sharpened their focus on, about 35 to 40 players, somewhere in that range, because, they do have to have those picks, in by December 31st. So we're getting down to a smaller kind of audition window for those players on the bubble. There's all the fact you've seen such a range, I would say, of roster projections, because no one's crazy, but, it just shows how tough it is. Like I think it's very possible the U.S. team on paper could be as good as Canada's or better. It depends how you view these things. But I actually don't think the U.S. has as many difficult decisions. I don't think they have the same high end pool. Like basically they have forwards that look really good compared to Canada's, but they don't have 10 more that could fill the last spot the same way Canada does. Zach Hyman hasn't played a game since last year's playoffs. And, my colleagues at TSN, Mike Johnson and Craig Button, put him on the team. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong, but, I'm a little less certain that's how that'll go. I mean, there's just so many unknowns with how Zach plays. And then you get into the whole center issue. Bo Horvat's had a great season. Nick Suzuki's had a great 2 seasons now, if you count last year and this year. Mark Scheifele's had a great 2 seasons, if you count last year and this year. Like, where do you find 3 more forward roles? Even with an extra roster spot, there'll be 14 forwards on this team. Even with the possibility a player or 2 or 3 from the Four Nations roster doesn't make it, there's just not a lot of space. There's not a lot of room. We're all kind of mentally making room for someone like Macklin Celebrini to take that step. It's not a ton of space for him. I think Tom Wilson is very much in the mix for this team. But if he makes it, probably someone with a bigger name or bigger salary or bigger resume might get left off. That would be a situational kind of pick. And Tom Wilson's also had a really good, strong start to the year. Seth Jarvis has been great for Carolina. I saw him in person there the other night. I had a chance to chat with him a bit post game. I've talked to a few people since. There's kind of a split. Is he on or is he off after he was the youngest member of the Four Nations team? So, there's a lot of these difficult calls. I think the forward group is the most challenging because there's just so many different ways you could go with it. You could see Connor Bedard's start and be like, yeah, we got to even make him the 14th forward. But doing that means potentially leaving off, Stanley Cup winners or someone of that nature. The goaltending decisions are kind of tricky, but for a different reason. It's that there aren't enough players that are popping that play net and have a Canadian passport. So that decision, I'm not going to say is easy, but I do think it's almost as easy as just watch as long as you can and judge who's playing, which guys are playing the best. I mean, I do think Jordan Binnington is on the team already, but then beyond that, it's more open. Logan Thompson has played probably the best of any Canadian goalie. So let's, if not fully write his name in and pen on the roster, I mean, it's in something a little darker than just your traditional pencil that could be erased easily. But the third goalie spot is wide open. And the blue line might not be many changes. It's very possible. Canada used 8 defensemen at the Four Nations tournament because Shea Theodore got injured in the first game. And then Thomas Harley came in. Like, it's possible the 8 defensemen who suited up there are the 8 that make it. It's not to say someone like a Noah Dobson, who I know is very much on the radar after his start in Montreal, can't get in there. Or Brandon Montour played very well for Canada, maybe a little below the radar at the World Championships last year, was one of the ice time leaders, put up a lot of points for them, moves the puck well. We talk about puck moving defensemen. I mean, Brandon Montour is a great guy to have on your team. He could get in one of those spots. I think Evan Bouchard's decision, that might be the most sort of, it could go a few ways. I mean, for one, you're talking about, he set a record 2 years ago in the playoffs for points by defenseman during the Oilers playoff run. So he's played big games, as is Montour. So he has that box ticked. He's got a certain degree of chemistry, obviously, with Connor McDavid and potentially Zach Hyman, I guess, if he's on the team, but certainly with McDavid, who's already been named. But at the same time, we all know that Cale Makar is going to play most of the power play minutes for a defenseman on Canada's blue line. So it would bringing Bouchard just be almost a redundancy, like too much of something you're not really going to need, assuming Makar is healthy to get through that tournament. I think that's a big debate point. But really what I'm getting at here is I think the changes will be not at all on the blue line or maybe one player or something like that, assuming injury situations don't change, make this sort of irrelevant as an analytical thought. I think the goaltending decisions will kind of make themselves just by who's playing well in 6-7 weeks from now. But the forward spots, man, that's where you make your money. I mean, I didn't even mention Wyatt Johnston. I know he's getting serious consideration. The management group has a lot of time for Robert Thomas. It's been a very tough start for him. It's been a tough start in St. Louis, but I think they like that they feel he could play a number of different roles on this team, could kind of be a good bottom of the roster forward because of different things he can do. And obviously has a lot of talent. That's where I think ultimately they're going to spend most of the debate time at the end, is just what they want to do with the forward group, because there's almost no wrong answer. I hate to land at that, but that's kind of how I feel.
I mean, you say there might be no wrong answer, but Canada is not in a position to be like, oh, hey, this bronze medal will do us just fine. There is a wrong answer.
Right. But the right and wrong will only be dictated by the result, not not the process, I guess. Which is fine.
No, right.
That's what this is. That should be that. Like I'm okay with that. In best on best sort of situations, like it's 6 games to win the tournament. It's not a long evaluation, as we know. There's not a long time to like get it right. You can lose a game in the early stages and still recover and win. We've seen Canada do that. 2002 Olympics, they did it at the 2010 Olympics. 2014 was perfection by the Canadian men. They literally didn't lose a game. I think they gave up 6 goals in the entire tournament or something ridiculous. But in general, this is a tough thing to navigate. And there is always the debate. They're looking at resume and history, and they want players that have played in big games. Like, let's talk about it the other way. Like, I do think Nick Suzuki is going to find his way onto this team. I think he's just been too good. He's undeniable in a sense. But he also hasn't played a big game in a long, long time. Like a truly big game. Obviously, he played playoff games for the Montreal Canadiens last year, but he hasn't been in a Stanley Cup final. He hasn't been in a gold medal final, even a Four Nations final. He was on that
21 team that was in the Cup final. It was 4 years ago. It was pandemic times.
Fair enough. I just don't think it's quite the same thing. And he was a young player.
I can understand that, but like, it's not like he hasn't played big games at all.
Right. Well, but I'm actually not trying to chop Nick down with this. What I'm saying though is that the current player he is right now, like he was a young player on that 21 Canadiens team. And so maybe, I guess what your point is well made at is that he's felt the pressure of those games and had to get out on the ice and do his thing. But like the management team hasn't seen him in that environment. Right. The easier example is Macklin Celebrini, just because he's so young. The Sharks haven't been near a big game in about 10 years, maybe a little less than that. But they were in the 2016 Cup final. But, the point is they haven't been as an organization in a big game in a long time. He wasn't on a World Junior team even that got to a gold medal game, which wasn't his fault. He was the best player on that team in Sweden, but the team itself didn't have great results. Like there's just an unproven element. Even the World Championship team last year where he played well in that environment against men. They had that stunning loss to Denmark, right? And so he hasn't played in something like a gold medal game, like on the level that in theory a Team Canada could find itself in the Olympics. So, I do think generally speaking, the management staff is going to lean towards players who've been through those moments and had success, been part of successful teams. One thing they trumpeted, I actually forget the exact number, but at the Four Nations event, something like 14 of the players on Canada's roster had won a Stanley Cup. And it might even be a little higher than that. But the vast majority of players of that team had literally played in the biggest games you can play as a hockey player and ended up lifting the big silver trophy at the end of, the last game of those series. So I think that brought some comfort. There's maybe a little more room to play with that with the extra roster spots at the Olympics, but it's just my way of saying that, I think it's hard for some of these newcomers to kind of burst their way in, especially, Mark Scheifele has been around the league. He's played big games. But he hasn't played in a Stanley Cup final, right? He hasn't played in a gold medal final in best on best. Like, I'm not saying he can't do it, but it's just, I think there's when they're choosing him versus someone who has done it, and it's one or the other, I think that's where those choices get a little complex. And that's frankly where the management staff kind of like, that's where they get their chops, right? That's what we're going to evaluate them on is those decisions. And did they work out? And did they overvalue experience, right? In the past, when Team Canada's gone wrong, this is a long time ago, and no one involved with that management staff's part of this one, but sometimes they've been too loyal to players, right? And you can understand the loyalty. Those players have delivered a lot of success. Well, the 2006 Turn games, which you might not remember, but I'll catch you up on it if you forget, is Canada didn't play very well there. And then they ultimately actually lost to a hot goaltender, Martin Gerber. They lost to Switzerland in that tournament, but they generated a ton of shots at least. They kind of got goalied in the game that knocked them out. But even before then, they weren't a J word in that tournament, if you know what I'm saying. They weren't a knot. A knot. But that being said, Canada's blessed to have a lot of great players. We could literally send 2 teams and the second team would be competitive. I'm convinced of that. I'm not saying the second team would win, but the second team would be competitive.
I really appreciate the fact that, how old do you think I was in 2006? I just want to know.
I'm assuming like 15.
I was actually younger in 2006.
There you go.
I vaguely remember 06. Right. I know we lost.
Yeah, and when I say that, it's I just if you're a kid, like you might not have been paying close attention, like not the way you would be now, right? Like that's
absolutely not.
That's all I meant by that is that, certain things that happened when I was like 12 to 15, if I wasn't dialed in on it, I probably don't even remember it happened at all almost or something. Anyway, I was just trying to be equitable out here. Well, honestly, it's not just you, Julian.
It was funny. I know.
It's not just you. I've met some of our listeners. Some of our listeners definitely don't know much about that tournament. They might be Googling it right now or whatever, going to the Wikipedia page. Team Canada, 2006. Like, it's amazing.
Switzerland.
2002 was so cool when Canada won because they hadn't won a men's Olympic gold in 50 years. But like, the fact remains, a lot of people don't remember that now. Like, time moves fast.
Yeah, I would imagine a lot of our listeners, like 2010 is the point for them. They would remember 2014. To your point, you're right. Like, yes. And I also think to go even further back, when you made the point about there's no wrong answer, I would think a better way of framing that is it's a lot better to have a pool of all these winning players and top players than to not have that.
For sure. Here's another way to put it. We could probably list, say, like 20 forwards, you and I, like the top, whoever, we're not going to do this, but I'm just like, hear me out for a second. You and I could agree on who we think the top 20 forwards are that are under consideration, right? And then I would say to you, you could take any 14 of those 20 in any order and you could defend it. Like, you could defend the decision, right? Like, you could come up for a reason why Wyatt Johnston had to be there and maybe why you left Mark Scheifele at home or some, then we go watch that team play and maybe they don't win and everyone's like, well, that was a terrible decision. Mark Scheifele was just sitting there on vacation and he's having this great year and he had a great year last year. And that's all true, right? Like, that's kind of what you deal with. I guess when I say there isn't a wrong or a right is that any 14 of the top 20 Canadian forwards on earth, you got a real good chance at winning a gold medal. Like, any one of them, even if somehow your model, like, we're doing a randomizer now. Somehow your randomizer leaves Connor McDavid off the roster. And of course, this would never happen. You still got a great chance to win if he's not there. Now, you got a much better chance if he's there. If you saw the goals he scored against Columbus, I mean, Edmonton, talk about needing to win. Edmonton needed to win on Monday against Columbus and who helped get them there. But anyway, it's, I would love to do it. I got to say, I don't look at it as, it's probably a burden you would feel if you were in charge because you just want your people you care about to be happy, and Canadians will only be happy with a gold medal. But I think it'd be really cool to be in those meetings. Like, I'd love to sit in on that 9 hours they had this week just to see, this management team's flying all over the continent, scouting. Like, imagine scouting the top players in the world. Like, usually you're scouting the third liners when you're a GM, because those are the guys that might get traded at some point. Like, you're not necessarily scouting, and with air quotes, the top line too often. But there we are.
I wish I asked this question earlier, but is there a name being floated around for Team Canada that maybe surprises you? It's like, oh, they're considering this guy, or is there no surprise?
Well, I think Tom Wilson could be a surprise for some. Like, because from my understanding is he's getting a long look. Like, I think he very much has a chance, like a really good chance to be on Team Canada. And that's not someone you necessarily think of in that role. He hasn't been part of those teams in the past. A little reminiscent maybe of where Brad Marchand was 10 years ago when he first got on a World Cup team in 2016. And people were like, what? Brad Marchand? They have the same history in that both of them spent a lot of time in the principal's office early in their NHL careers, getting suspended and the like. But obviously Tom Wilson has since become more of an offensive player. He's a big man who skates well, still doesn't shy away from the physical part of the game, but keeps it between the lines a little better. So I think that might be a surprise. But I don't know if there's I don't think any of the names that I've heard would surprise you. I mean, at this point, they're down to roughly 40 players. I mean, they're down to almost like the top 25 guys that we mentioned. I mean, we haven't talked about John Tavares has had a great start to the year. I think he's like on the deep levels of consideration. I think Quentin Byfield's in the same spot. As I mentioned, Horvat, Suzuki, Scheifele, Wyatt Johnston, Robert Thomas, like those are kind of the players that are pushing to get in there. I think the guys that were on the Four Nations team, like Travis Konechny, it's going to be, he's in a battle to make the next team. Anthony Cirelli is going to be an interesting character. Just because of obviously he's got immense trust in the head coach of the team, John Cooper, who coaches him in Tampa. But I think depending on who you ask in the decision makers room, he's not a slam dunk. Doesn't mean he won't be there. Just means like it's going to be a discussion. And, I guess this is the way it would be. Well, let's see what happens with Mark Stone too. We haven't mentioned him, but he's been out with a wrist injury for some time now. Now I'm led to believe he'll be back in time and he should be okay to be under consideration. But how do they treat that? How do they treat the Hyman situation? I mean, it's insane. The Canadian decisions are insane. But that's probably why the Canadian men have won something like 7 of the 9 best on best tournaments ever played.
We still need you to build that roster, CJ.
Oh, yeah.
I still want you to do that. We've teased it on, I think, 3 or 4 episodes in a row. We're going to make that happen. Okay.
Well, I mean, I'm sure work's going to want me to do it anyway at the Athletics. So I could, the classic thing, I can do it for them and we can talk about it on the pod and everybody's happy.
That's okay. I have no problem with that. Everyone eats in that scenario. I'm cool with that. We can move away from Team Canada. And I'd like to talk about a team I don't think we focused on enough on this podcast to start this season, the Colorado Avalanche. This is a team that, I get it, they've had the pieces to compete for a cup for quite some time, but their start, I've really enjoyed their start. I mean, Nathan McKinnon, obviously, for going into individual players, he's up at the top of the leaderboards for goals and points. Cale Makar is also off to a really good year. And if you even want the feel good, Gabe Landeskog finally scoring his first regular season goal in over 1,300 days. Those stories are great to follow for a team like the Colorado Avalanche. What have you made of their start to the season? It's
a start that makes you sort of perk up and take notice, right? They crashed out of the playoffs last year. They had, were leading by multiple goals on the road in Dallas in Game 7 and didn't get to leave with being on the right side of that handshake line. So, I mean, that can tell you, the motivation is not far for that team. I mean, they got upset a few years ago by Seattle in the playoffs. It's been a tough road for them. But if you look at basically anything you look by, like I've been talking to some scouts for some other stories I'm doing, but you end up kind of just getting into like one of these hot stove sessions about things going on around the league. And I just think they're widely viewed as the best team in the league to start the year. Now, it's the same way when we talk about the teams that are on the downswing or where things haven't gone well, like you don't win anything for being the best team in the league in mid-November, but I've got no holes to poke in their start. It was so cute how every day we were like, oh, Macklin Celebrini's leading the scoring race. No, it's Connor Bedard. It's Celebrini. It's Bedard. But then McKinnon just like literally just launched the shuttle. He had 12 points in 3 games since, the last few days here. He's kind of taken hold of it. Cale Makar has been absolutely awesome. We talk about why Canada has a good chance at a gold medal. Well, it's because those 2 players, in addition to playing for the league-leading Colorado Avalanche, get to put on Team Canada sweaters when it gets to Milano in February. So I think the Avs are well positioned, and they've already signed the Natchez extension, and they kind of got burned with maybe some sets of decisions they made last year personnel-wise. I think they're going to go all in. And even when I did the front office poll at the start of the year, Julian, a lot of people said we really liked Colorado's deadline last season. Like, yeah, sure, they didn't win in the playoffs, and I guess you're judged by that, but the moves they made, how they sort of retooled their roster. They did a little bit more than just buying players. If you remember, they traded a guy like Casey Middlestat out as part of the deals to get Coyle, to get Brock Nelson in there. They maneuvered a fair bit. Even I mean, look at the Rantanen set of decisions you might not like, and I don't mean you directly, but hockey fans might quibble with those. But like they were pretty aggressive in the things they did, right? And I just think that they're going to be in the same posture again. And so, look, it could be Colorado's year, but they've one regulation loss to this point in the season kind of tells you everything you need to know. Most teams have lost more than that this week. Yes. We've talked about some of those teams. I'll say this about Colorado. I get we say they crashed out in the first round. That could have easily been a Western Conference matchup against the Dallas Stars in that first round last year. I don't think anyone's going to be too surprised if they go on a run. If they went on a run last year and if they go on a run this year. Just, again, they're one of those teams that has everything. Yeah, and they got a little piss and vinegar too, right? Like they got a little That's the technical term that we're using these days for what they have. But they have a fiery leader in McKinnon. They have what I view as kind of like a proud dressing room. Like those guys have been through so many battles. They ultimately did win that Stanley Cup over Tampa back in 2022. But that's a long time ago in sporting terms, and just because careers are so short. And so I think that they're on a mission too. I think there's an element of that to what you're seeing. And so those players have elevated. They've played great to start the season. I think that they're fueled by their immense talent, but also what they've been through. And, this could be their season. And so, tip of the cap to them. I mean, that's the other side. Like, it's easy to focus on how did Edmonton lose 9-1, but someone had to beat them 9-1 too. Someone had to take advantage of their mistakes and their defensive breakdowns. Someone had to make their goalies look average. Someone had to keep the pedal to the floor as the Avalanche did in that game. And maybe it shouldn't be a surprise that it was a team like Colorado because they are that good.
Until something changes, for me right now, maybe it's too early to say. I have them as the Western Conference team in the final right now. I need someone to prove me wrong, but I think they're going to be there when there's two teams standing. I'd be happy to be wrong, but am I going to be wrong?
I like their week too. Like,
but I don't know.
If you think of it, like they win that 9-1 game, then they go to Vancouver, win, then they go home, and they're playing Anaheim, right? And Anaheim has been one of the real surprise nice stories of the year, and they put the Ducks kind of in their place in a sense, a 4-1 win, but a pretty thorough victory, like top to bottom. Like they're not even showing signs of like, oh, there's this good thing happening, and then they're relaxing. Like they just feel like they're really locked in, dialed in. I mean, they're a wagon, as the kids say. I mean, they're gonna be a tough team to slow down.
I like the term wagon, and we're not using the J word on them. The wagon word is fine.
I've personally retired that word because somehow that's seen as like I actually have the power to control the future, and I don't want that kind of power.
Said from a man who has said hundreds of times he does not have a crystal ball, by the way. Hundreds
of times, and I'm not using it. I don't know who's winning yet, Julian.
All right. We'll circle back on that. One more thing before we get to Stick Taps. Any thoughts on the Tkachuk Brothers podcast, Wingmen, that's debuting this week? They made the announcement on the Pat McAfee show on Wednesday. A lot of people had opinions about it. We talked about it in the group chat earlier. Just curious about your thoughts.
I got to say, like, what took you so long, boys? I mean, we've been out here for years on the hustle.
Yeah,
we've been out here showing you the way, and now you're just going to walk in. I mean, I think, look, there's no downside to this that I see. Hockey can use this kind of exposure. We've seen how big the Kelsey Brothers podcast has gotten, and that started when both, Jason and Travis Kelsey were still active NFL players. Obviously now only Travis remains in the league playing for the Kansas City Chiefs. But point being is this has worked elsewhere. It's risen, maybe brought new fans in or brought fans to conversations that they're not seeing had anywhere else. And so, what I like about the Tkachuk family is they've been so open to all these things, whether it's letting the Amazon cameras in, even just dealing with them a little ourselves over the years. I think you can attest, like, very easy players to deal with. I think very open. And my only wish, and I don't know if I'll get it granted, but I just hope they go in on the teams they're playing a little bit, like what they're seeing as they go around the league. Obviously, both players are out injured right now, but once they're back playing for the Ottawa Senators and Florida Panthers, I hope they go in on how they see the Eastern Conference shaking up, what it's like when they go on a Western road trip, talking about individual players. If there's any sort of big controversial moments, like, I hope they weigh in on that. I hope they have the confidence to do so. I think they're the type of personalities that will, but I don't know what pressures they're getting behind the scenes. I don't know what, if their organizations or their agent or, like anybody, I'm not trying to blame anybody here, but I don't know how much people behind the scenes are going to tell them to be boring. I hope that they're interesting. I hope that they set the agenda, and I hope they bring fans in to places that they don't otherwise get to go, because they have the ability to do so. Like two of the more prominent players in the league, getting behind the mic once a week. I mean, it could be box office.
It could be. Both of those guys don't really have a filter, so my expectation is that that will carry on throughout this podcast. And I understand that there are people who have seen this and they're like, oh God, like these two guys, the two guys from Four Nations who didn't win, they're carrying out their fame to this level. The bar is so low for people to show personality in this sport. We're giving them points for trying. For me, if this inspires like the next generation of players to be like, oh, this is just a regular thing and we're just going to do this, and we up the quality of personalities who are able to get on a mic as active players and do this, that's all the better for everybody. Like,
well, NBA players, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't listen to those, but there's a number of NBA players active over years that have done this, right? Like, this is not unusual in other sports.
So for the Tkachuk brothers to do this, they're basically catching up. And we don't even have to just go in on NBA players. But Major League Baseball has done this too. I think Mookie Betts has his own podcast as well. Like, this is something you see in other sports, not to mention New Heights with Travis Kelce and Jason Kelce. So the NHL is just late to the party. But the fact that they're doing something, I would like to see more. They're here. I'd like to see more people follow their lead. And while I mentioned earlier about the no filter thing, there is a part of me in the back of my head that's like, I wonder if they say something that goes a little too far. I'm not wishing for it, but I am just kind of just waiting on the outside being like, okay, what could be that thing? Do they say something? Does something happen? And everyone's going to be like, see, we knew this was a bad idea. And I'm not wishing for it to be a bad idea, but there's a part of me that's like, okay, like, are they going to be able to do this? Like, I'm wondering about it. Maybe that's too cautious, but I have a lot of questions about how this will go. But I am ultimately encouraged that someone in the NHL, particularly these two guys, are doing this.
I hope they go too far rather than not far enough.
That's true. That's very true.
Especially if you don't do anything. Right. If you're boring, it just never leaves the ground. But my other thinking, too, is you can always apologize. Knowing them, I don't think they would ever do anything malicious. So they're not going to do anything like on purpose that's too far. It just may be whatever, the filter, whatever it is. I think you can walk that back and apologize and just say sorry. If they're too cautious, if it feels too much like Tuesday after practice and someone's told them not to say much, then I just don't think it's kind of pointless. Like, I feel like they should just be themselves. And if they're themselves, I don't see any problems.
Yeah, you know what? I'm fully in agreement with you on that. And if they do go too far, well, I'm sure we'll find a way to talk about it, or the people will talk about it. Yeah,
but I don't know. I'm willing to grant people, again, it depends on the kind of too far we're talking about it, and I don't even want to get into the hypotheticals because but like, the point is, I'm willing to grant people some grace. Like, sometimes you say dumb shit. I've said some dumb shit on here, I'm sure. And thank you if you're still listening, even though you've heard said dumb shit.
I don't think you've said that dumb of shit.
Probably.
We both said shit, by the way, so this is an explicit podcast.
It's an explicit pod.
Ah, damn it. We tried so hard. Do you have a stick tap before we get out of here?
I didn't prepare today.
Oh, God.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
I love your response. Oh, God.
Oh, God, no. Sorry. I was just going to, I kind of half prepared mine too. I was just going to give it to Connor McDavid for his performance against Columbus earlier this week. This is a guy who we kind of briefly mentioned earlier. They got beaten 9-1. They needed a good response. I thought that was a pretty good response, particularly from 97, who tried his best to win the game on his own. Stick tap.
Fair. I'll give it to the two young players making the conversation in the league pop. I mean, it's got to be Connor Bedard and Macklin Celebrini. As much as I mentioned Nathan McKinnon surging ahead, those guys were literally going back and forth for a couple days there, leading the league in scoring. There's no way that's a bad thing. If you're a fan in their markets where the teams haven't won enough, it's a great thing. But even if you're just a league-wide fan, having two recent first overall picks become that good already is it's pretty exciting, and it'll be interesting to see if they can convince the Canadian management team to pay attention and bring at least one of them.
Stick taps. Even when we half prepare, we still have good ones. Great work as always, CJ. We'll be back early next week with a brand new episode. Get your questions in now for Ask CJ. Subscribe to the podcast. We are getting very close to episode 400 of this show, CJ. I don't know if you realize that.
We could have stick tapped Mr. 400. David Pasternak got the 400 goals.
Oh, yes. Yes,
they could have stick tapped John Tavares, who got to 500 goals in the last week. So
there's a lot of people, a lot of milestones.
If you're into milestones, there's been some pretty big, like I just was at the Hall of Fame right on Monday night. 500 goals is pretty much get you the Hall of Fame. Not exactly, but more or less historically, that's been the number. So the fact Pastrnak at his age, not even 30 yet, is already at 400. I mean, he's obviously on a Hall trajectory, and John Tavares, I think, is going to put himself there too if he can stay healthy and play out his contract in Toronto.
I think Pasternak's like the fourth fastest to get to that rate too. Like
among active players, or
I have to double check that stat. In all fairness, I can.
Ovi was probably at like 700 on the same pace, just because. I mean, anyway.
Feel free to correct me on Discord to everyone who listens to the show. By the way, follow us on Discord. And thank you again for everyone who listened to today's episode. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode of CJ Show. Thanks so much for listening.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.